Before the Rings of Power, there were the Silmarils. Before Sauron, there was his master Morgoth. Before Aragorn and Arwen, there was Beren and Luthien. Join us as we explore Tolkien and all the ages of Middle-earth with your hosts from theonering.com, Jonathan Watson and Michael Grumbine.
Because I always forget to say this every single time. Hey, if you like our podcast and you enjoy it, please give us a review on Apple Podcasts. It would be nice to have some more. I know we get thousands of listeners every week, and so I would love to have more folks sending us reviews. But I never remind anybody, so nobody ever does anything. So I'm going to be one of those annoying people that just says, "Hey, man, can you just give us a 5-star review? Not a 1-star, not a 2-star, not a 3-star. Give us a 5-star review. It'd be so cool." I sound like Halbrand now. Speaking of Halbrand, we just did our review of the final of the San Diego Comic-Con 30-minute and 52-second trailer for The Rings of Power. So go check that out on our YouTube channel at theonering.com/YouTube. We'll get you there. And there, when you look at that, hey, like, subscribe, do all the good things there too, so that you don't miss any of the things that we put onto YouTube, not just onto the podcast feed. So there's more stuff there all the time that you can check out. So anyway, Michael, good to see you again. I just saw you 5 minutes ago, but it's nice to see your smiling face. Without John Trent, we don't need him.
Yeah, it was fun. Everyone will have seen, or if they didn't, they can see our reaction video to the Rings of Power trailer that just
we'll be putting that up probably on Friday the 26th. So a few days before this is published on the YouTube's internets.
And boy, did it change our minds. We're looking forward to season 2, The Rings of Power. Totally.
Yeah. It didn't change our minds at all. All right, so this is going to be a short ever episode, guys, because we're going through, and I'm trying to talk fast to get through this all. We're only going through half of chapter 2, Roast Mutton. So really, it's the point at which they reach the trolls, because I think there's enough to talk about the trolls next week when we get into it. And I love this slow, deliberate pass through into the Hobbit, through the Hobbit. And so we'll do that. We'll see what we get through out of this here. But first, as is our wont every week, we have our
Hobbit Facts.
Yes, there is a Hobbit fact, guys, that I came across that I didn't know until this week. And I know we were saying earlier about how the Hobbit really wasn't written in Middle-earth, and like he kind of made it up for his children, and so everything he knew he kind of threw into there. Right? You have engines, and you have policemen, and you have all these sort of things that that weren't really part of Middle-earth, but that he still put into there. However, I did get this book, The History of the Hobbit, that I'd never gone through before. And to be fair, I've never gone through the Hobbit in this detail, because it's always going through the histories of the First Age, the Second Age, that I found more interesting, because it creates the world of Middle-earth so much more. And that's my favorite part of Tolkien's world. So in one of the original manuscripts discovered, Tolkien actually references Beren and Luthien originally. So I'm going to read directly from the History of the Hobbit here. And I know you haven't read this yet, Michael, because you just got the copy of the History of Hobbit this week. Woohoo! I've been telling you every week. We've been waiting for weeks to finally get that. So you finally got it. Haven't had the chance, because this is already on page 150 out of 1,500 pages of the History of the Hobbit. It's kind of nuts.
Wow.
So in this manuscript, which is a continuation of the manuscript we were talking about in a couple episodes ago, when he's talking about the necromancer, he's actually calls him Thu, which is Thu, which is his original name for Sauron. So here's what he wrote in a comment about the necromancer's castle originally in this manuscript of the Hobbit. This is from the author Ratcliffe of The History of the Hobbit. Bloodorthan's comment that the necromancer's castle stands no more and he is flown to another darker place. Beren, he says this is what is in the manuscript. Beren and Tenuviel broke his power, but that is quite another story. And he writes this: it's not surprising that the earlier work was still fresh in Tolkien's mind, nor that he would forge the connection between it and the new story taking shape. He had written this passage in the poem referring to Thu in March and April of 1928, the poem The Lay of Leithian, which is the poem The Beren of Beren and Luthien. What's more, work on the two pieces overlap. Tolkien began The Hobbit in the summer of 1930 and was still writing new lines for The Lay of Leithian as late as September 1931. Thus, if any part of the Silmarillion material were to have a direct impact on the new story, The Lay of Lathian is the natural piece where you might expect to find it, and the influence is there right down to verbal echoes. After Thu's defeat, the destruction of his tower, and the release of his captives, the Lay describes how Thu abandoned his body and took the form of a giant vampire bat. So here's what he says about why he cut these lines. Why, having made explicit ties between Mr. Baggins' story and that of Beren and Luthien, did Tolkien later cut these lines? The answer, I think, lies in the problems of chronology they create. If, as Bledorthin says, Gandalf's father perished, Gandalf being, okay, Bledorthin is Gandalf, as we know him. Gandalf is Thorin, as we know him. It's getting a little confusing. Gandalf / Thorin's father perished in the dungeons of the Necromancer, but his castle has since been cast down by Beren and Tuneville. Then less than a century has passed between those events of Beren and Luthien and the time of this story, since Gandalf's father set out of his ill-fated journey 100 years ago last Tuesday. It's a far too short a time to create the narrative distance from the Silmarillion tradition Tolkien seems to be striving for. So it's a detail thing, right? He couldn't put it in because it wouldn't match the details necessary to create the story. Like it would happen. It's not 100 years different. So, but that he actually put it in, right? It was forefront in his mind. I did not know that Beren and Luthien, I mean, they're mentioned in the Lord of the Rings, but they're actually originally in The Hobbit too. I thought that was pretty cool.
That is cool. I have never heard that. And it is cool, especially because obviously the parallel there is with Morgoth and Beren and Luthien, taking down Sauron's boss, not Sauron, but that's at least that's how it eventually ends up in the Silmarillion, the texts that we now call the Silmarillion. And so that is very cool, and it shows that his desire was always to tie these two together in some way.
Yeah, and though he did that even more so in the abandoned 1960 rewrite, which we will go into once again. Check out last week's episode if you missed that, about how he rewrote the first chapter and the changes that he made, and how it is really quite tonally different, more so than I would have expected. All right, we will have a brief extended. We'll go over a couple things from some of you fans and a couple of other notes, particularly probably maybe about the Rings of Power. But if you want to get that, guys, go to theonering.com/member, become a member. $4 a month. First month is free. Or go to theonering.com/Patreon and become a member there. You get the extended podcast, get access to our Discord chat where you can ask questions directly, and also get an early release as early as I can make it, because I don't know when I have time to edit all these things. But as the early release of the membership podcast, members episode on YouTube. So it's always posted there early and on Patreon early as well. So join us at theonering.com/member. Okay. Today, then, we're going to be going over the first half of Roast Mutton, the chapter that sees Bilbo still fighting a bit with his Tookish side and his Baggins side, particularly right in the beginning.
He leaves the Shire. So this is the leaving of the Shire.
Right.
What I found most striking about this chapter is the beginning of the chapter is still full of the old chapter, in the sense that you have clocks and mantelpieces, you have punctuality. There's at least 6 references to specific times: 10:30, 10:45, 10 minutes until 11 p.m. exactly, 11 a.m. rather exactly. Be in the Green Dragon Inn in Bywater at 11 a.m. sharp. And as if dwarves and hobbits of some yesteryear land had English punctuality and ran their lives the way the English learned to in the late 19th and early 20th century. So it's fascinating that Tolkien's still keeping, like, this is the Shire of the Hobbit, is basically 19th century England, late 19th century England.
I don't know if that speaks to this, but one of the things that stuck out to me, and that I think that's part of it, punctuality, is manners. Manners is very important in a sense, like in the last chapter too, but the distinction made here in manners, both of like being punctual and also like you didn't dust the mantelpiece yet, and we'll see it even further when they talk about the manners of the trolls next episode. But I'm wondering, it was a story told to children. Do you think that was in his mind as he was like saying these things, particularly with the trolls, about like when we get to it, wiping his shirt, his mouth on his sleeve and things like that?
Right. And he's very upset about running off without his pocket handkerchiefs, and is greatly relieved when Gandalf shows up with multiple pocket handkerchiefs, which is it's such a proper thing to do. It's so etiquette based, and is to have pocket handkerchiefs. And so it's even, I mean, even more so than smoking pipes. Like that's been around for centuries. But the whole pocket handkerchief thing and dusting the mantelpiece and clocks and 10:45 a.m. and 11 a.m. sharp and all this talk about punctuality. This is just, it's a very different world. And then they leave, and all of a sudden they're in the Lone Lands, and things are a little different.
They're different, but yeah. Yet he has to. Isn't that at this point that he has to like dress up in the dwarves' clothes too?
Right.
Right. Which it's that has to be an affront to his sense of decency at this point, because he's wearing the hat. He's got the cloak. He looks a little foolish, and so even when he's going about, right, and what it does is it sort of shows that he's trying to be a part of the group, but he's not really a dwarf. And we learned that. I'm going to have to jump forward a little bit now since it's part of the same chapter. But we learned that in that he doesn't, like, the dwarves are loud and trampy and they make so much noise, right? That point is made. Whereas, he kind of Tolkien says I don't have the quote right in front of me because we were going to do this, but he's annoyed by the dwarves. And he's constantly annoyed. So it always makes me wonder, like, why? What was the final? Was it really just Gandalf pushing him out? That was the final, like, was that the final weight on the scale of his tookishness to be like totally okay? Or was it his tookishness deciding to go out and do it? What was the final effect? Because it's sort of like going up to somebody and you're holding a piece of trash and you just say to them, "Here, hold this," and they just put out their hand like without thinking and they do it. Is that what happened to Bilbo? Is like, Gandalf was like, "No, you got to go. You got 10 minutes. That's it. You're going to have to run. You better go." And so he just goes. Like he doesn't even think about it. It's an interesting, what forces him out the door at this point? Is it the snowball effect? I guess that's the way that I'm thinking about it. It's everything going in, and then Gandalf he just needs that little nudge to finally get him there, and he doesn't have enough resistance to it.
Yeah. It's a fascinating work making that transition. And there are other things that happen that are funny as they go on. I found it highly amusing. I noticed this time that everything turns from great to sour in the most iconic way, British way possible, which is it starts to rain without end. So that's it. Like everything was great, and they're traveling along, and then all of a sudden it starts raining without end, and then everything goes to pot, and they're grumpy, and they can't light a fire, and Gandalf just disappears, like pop on.
Right. Yeah. And they don't even notice. They're like, "Oh, wait."
They don't even notice, which is, what was hilarious. It reminds me, in a couple of years ago, 2021, 2022, they recovered the Soviet version of Lord of the Rings, the Soviet miniseries that had aired once on Leningrad TV back in 91. I remember
hearing about this. Yeah. I saw a little clip of it. Yeah.
And it is so weird and so hilarious. But one of the things that was a reality in it that made me laugh was when they're doing Moria in this Soviet version of Lord of the Rings, they didn't have the money for the Balrog. So they don't have Gandalf fighting the Balrog. They just make it through Moria getting chased by orcs. And then at the end, they're like, "Oh, Gandalf's gone. Well, he must have died. All right." They move on.
It's the sort of thing. It's like Gandalf just, he just disappears.
He disappears.
He just says, it was nearly night when they had crossed over Stonebridge, which again, okay, Stonebridge. The next episode is called, the rewritten chapter, I think, is called The Broken Bridge. Was that what it was called? I don't have it in front of me. The rewritten chapter in the abandoned 1960 version. So the bridge obviously holds a lot more import in that chapter. Let me get back to that. It was nearly night when they had crossed over. The wind broke up the gray clouds, and a wandering moon appeared above. I love that wandering moon appeared above the hills between the flying rags. I love that, between the flying rags, right? The ragged clouds broke. Anyway, then they stopped, and Thorin muttered something about supper and where shall we get a dry patch to sleep on. Not until then did they notice that Gandalf was missing. So far, he'd come all the way with them, never saying if he was in the adventure or merely keeping them company for a while. He'd eaten most, talked most, and laughed most, but now he simply was not there at all. He'd eaten most, and now they just forget about him.
And you have to understand, like, Gandalf's huge. Like, they're all small. They're all dwarves, and they're walking, and hobbits. And Gandalf's the only one riding a horse. They have ponies with parcels and stuff, but Gandalf's the only one, I think.
But I was going to say, here's why I think that they have this, like, they totally forgot about Gandalf. and that happens in the paragraph right before it.
Yeah.
They say, still the dwarves jogged on, never turning round or taking any notice of the Hobbit. So I'm sure the same could be said of Gandalf. If
Right.
they have
He was
the
probably
nose
in
to
the back,
ground. Yeah.
and then he just disappeared. Right.
Yeah.
Right. And we also learn a little something. Tolkien starts telling us things to make the Hobbit them different. We knew from the first chapter that Biffer, Boffer, Bomber love to eat. We learn from this chapter that Dory and Nori like regular meals, like hobbits. So apparently they're hobbit-like in their desire for regular meals. And then Oin and Gloin are the best at lighting fires, and they get really upset because they can't light a fire even they can't light a fire, which throws the mood gets even darker. And this is what provides the attraction to what ends up being the Troll's fire, the red light.
Yeah.
So we're learning a bit about the others. Of course, Thorin grumbles a lot, which doesn't seem it. He hasn't been grumbling in the previous chapter, but he's not a very positive person. So we're learning a little bit more about the dwarves, and but then when push comes to shove, and it's time for them, they need fire, and they see a fire in the distance, in the woods, on the hills, or after the bridge. They immediately turn to the Hobbit, which I found to be fascinating, because it's always dwarves. Here they are, and they're all in a clump, and they're all miserable. But they're like, let's send the burglar up to do what the burglar's supposed to do.
Right. And that happens more than once, right? They just are like, yeah, no. It's the red shirt. Send the red shirt out.
Right, exactly. He's the original red shirt. Right. Now it is the burglar's turn, they said, meaning Bilbo. You must go on and find out all about that light and what it is for, and if all is perfectly safe and canny, said Thorin to the Hobbit. Now scuttle off and come back quick if all is well. If not, come back if you can. If you can't, hoot twice like a barn owl and once like a screech owl, and we will do what we can.
It's like he didn't even know what is the line after that. Read the next line after that about what Bilbo thinks about the barn owl screech owl.
Bilbo had to go before he could explain that he could not hoot even once like any kind of owl, any more than fly like a bat.
Yeah, it's just so great. They pass the buck there, and it shows like they're. I mean, maybe it's because they're so focused on everything else. They're like, no, we don't want to deal with that. You go deal with that. Like, you figure it out. It's not.
I don't think it is. It can't be they're so focused on anything else, because what is there to focus on? They can't light a fire. They want to find out if it's safe, and they want to get access to that fire. And I think, I mean, the only thing I could think to keep it reasonable is they realize this is a land where people here could be unfriendly, so they're sending their burglar in to check out and see if it's friendly peeps or not, and it turns out it's not.
I think the most like the one thing we kind of skipped over, I want to kind of take a little backtrack, is the contract. I think that's I read, so I'm reading a few other commentaries about this history of the Hobbit, annotated Hobbit. I've got another couple, so I'm kind of looking at it, and there's an interesting discussion that people have about this. Some people think it's a completely tongue-in-cheek contract, that it's written to be funny. To Bilbo, like not even to Bilbo, but Thorin wrote it unseriously, like thinking this is never going to happen. Whereas others think this is just Tolkien kind of making a joke about what has to happen legally speaking, because he hated all that part of the administrative side of everything, but putting that in there, what he thought was kind of a joke. So those seem to be the two sides of it. But what do you think Thorin wrote that to be as a humorous jest to himself, or to the dwarves, or to Bilbo, to Gandalf? Particularly about, thinking it unnecessary to disturb your esteemed repose. We have proceeded in advance to make requisite preparation. Shall wait your respected person. Like, there are these.
Clearly, there's funny. He's being funny in those lines that you said. But do I think that the contract is? No, I don't, because there's nothing funny in the contract. I mean, there is one funny thing, which is funeral expenses to be defrayed by us or our representatives if occasion arises and the matter is not otherwise.
Who are their representatives? I love that.
It's the dwarf collective, the Erebor collective.
I wonder if this was something that he got from the military, and
probably, yeah. It's very bureaucratic language, and it could have been from the military. But I actually don't think that there was no need for Thorin wrote a note to get Bilbo out the door and meet them in Bywater by 11 a.m. And so there was no need for him to put in the part about the contract at all. It just doesn't, for people that are so for dwarves that shown themselves to be so concerned with their gold and their money, for him to then in writing offer 1/14 of the profits of their venture is a very specific reference. I just can't see it not being a real thing for Thorin. I don't buy the whole this is all a joke explanation. But that is the first time I've heard it. So
yeah,
maybe there's something compelling.
It'll be interesting when we read the rewritten chapter to see if this changes at all.
Interesting.
Did Tolkien make it more? You leave it as humorous as this here? I think what it is it's a word we used before in the loss of, or the biggest loss, in my opinion, of Tolkien's rewritten chapter 1, 1960 rewritten chapter 1, is there's a charm to this, right? It's very it's funny, it's charming, it draws you in a little bit closer because of the little bit of tongue-in-cheek humor about it, but not that it's so tongue-in-cheek that it's Monty Python, and I think that adds a lot to the value of the tone of the story.
Right, it's not senseless tongue-in-cheek, but it is funny, and there's plenty of charm, as you say, playfulness, as I think I said last time. It's a very endearing story, and a lot of these little details, most of which are funny, are a great part of what makes it so attractive.
Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, there's not a whole lot in this part of the chapter. I think there's that the journey is so brief in The Hobbit, the time it takes to go from one location to another in words. Like, I don't think, does he even mention in here how many days or nights, how far?
No, he doesn't. He doesn't. That's what's interesting. It's clearly been multiple days because it talks about that, and their sleeping and eating patterns over time, which means that you have to go for more than a day for that to be the case. But it doesn't say how long, and it does talk about the lone lands and this land between Rivendell and the lands of the Shire, but that's it. That's the only thing it gives us. No mention of what will later be Bree,
right?
So which would have been all along the path, and obviously, clearly, I mean, it would have been the road that the dwarves took. They would have gone through Bree if there had been a Bree, but there clearly wasn't a Bree yet. So
I'm going to see if I can find anybody who actually, I didn't think about this here. Just occurred to me now. Find somebody who actually put together like the Hobbit's path versus the Fellowship's path in the two, and see where they went.
Well, that would be interesting. The reason I said it was because they're going to Rivendell from the Shire, so this is the road. The road to go to Rivendell. But
like the timing of that, it'd be interesting to see what that is compared to the two. And I think I read. Maybe it was in the annotated Hobbit that here it is. In a revision that he made in 1966. The comment is this revision was made to bring the geography of the Hobbit more in line with that of the Lord of the Rings. This revision meaning this revision about where the river is, where the bridge is, more in line with that in the Lord of the Rings, and specifically to introduce the ancient stone bridge called the Last Bridge, or the Bridge of Mithithil, in the Fellowship of the Rings. It was a 3-arched bridge, the easternmost on the road, crossing over the river Horwell, which the elves called the Mithithil, and Sindarin, which means Grey Spring. So it's interesting that when Tolkien went back to it again, we talked about that in the last couple of weeks, is that the details are what he ends up getting back into, because those details really matter. And in his rewrite, he's worried about a lot of these details. And so even in the 1966 version, he starts changing things in order to bring them more in line with Lord of the Rings, particularly when it comes with locations, places, distances, things that make it more believable and less fairy tale-ish.
Right. The reality of geography is interesting. It's not a reality that brings it more in line with the 19th century Hobbit world of hobbits that we've been pointing out in the first chapter, but it does it makes it more real. It gives that that secondary world character, putting in geography. I laughed when I read the original 1937 version of the description of the Lone Lands, because it says in the version that we all read, 1966 version, now they had gone far into the Lone Lands, where there were no people left, no inns, and the roads grew steadily worse. In 1937, when the book was first published, Inns were rare and not good. The roads were worse, and there were hills in the distance rising higher and higher. So, I laughed because the whole Babylon Bee not good thing, but there was also, it was inns were rare and not good. The idea of the quality of the inns being a point that Tolkien brings up is a great concern to the British as well. So it's a very, very British thing. How good are the pubs in this place that I'm passing through?
Right.
So,
I want to say the one most interesting thing I think that Tolkien, I have to say Tolkien. I always say Tolkien because I've said it for so many years that way, but I know it's Tolkien.
Yep.
The one thing he didn't take out in the 1966 edition is this line. Talking again about this is I guess this is this is a little bit this is in the next chapter, but I still want to bring it up. Tolkien writes this: others said, these parts are none too well known and are too near the mountains. Travelers seldom come this way. The old maps are no use. Things have changed for the worse and the road is unguarded. They have seldom even heard of the king around here. And the less inquisitive are as far as you go, the less trouble you are likely to find. And I was like, oh, you left that line in about the king. Now it's not a capital K king, it's a lowercase king. And I found that really interesting that was a line he left in because it feels out of place in the Lord of the Rings. There is no king at this point. There's no mention of a king. The hobbits don't have a king. The dwarves, I mean, there's no king in that area, right? Unless he had a reason. Do you think he had a reason for leaving that in?
Well, I don't know if he had a reason, but I do know that he's setting, it's part of I think it matches with the background of Lord of the Rings. So I think it's more because in Lord of the Rings there are kings, and there was in fact a king in these lands in Arnor. This is the Shire is a part of Arthedain in Arnor, and so there's there was a king, and then historically there had been a king, and in fact the hobbits had in one of the letters or unfinished I can't even remember now. I've read too much over the years, but the hobbits even had there was a levy. There was like a group of sort of militia, hobbit militia that were
right.
Part of the king's army. And so that's a reference to this king of old. And we have the remnants of the king's men who are the rangers, right? They're Dunedain. They guard the Shire, and they know the Dunedain know they have the king's heir in their midst. So there's you're right that there's no king at the time of Lord of the Rings over Arnor.
Yeah.
But that's part of the history. It's a history of kings. We even have that. There's nobility and history there with the wraiths and the barrows, and the men of Cardolan, for example. And so I just think it's all part of that background milieu.
I guess it's the definitive article of which makes me the king.
You're right.
Which
you're right.
You're right. It was they hadn't heard of the kings plural,
right,
because the king would have been a long time ago. And to have that there anyway, it's curious.
But here's the interesting thing: at the end of the Return of the King, it's referred to as they're returning back, like the hobbits are returning to the Shire and the lands they're moving through. They make mention of the fact, if I remember it correctly, that it's the king has returned, right? So here's a land that remembers that there's supposed to be a king over the land, and so the return of the king is a real thing, even in Arnor, far away from the doings of Gondor and the actual events of Lord of the Rings. Here's one thing that wasn't part of that in any way, shape, or form, so much so that he took it out, and this was hilarious. The reference to policemen in 1937, instead of these parts are none too well known and too near the mountains. Travelers seldom come this way. Now, in 1937, it's policemen never come so far, and the map makers have not reached this country yet. So the police.
So but when you think he's telling kids, he's like, "There's no safety."
Exactly.
And there's no map. There's no way, you don't know where you're going. So like the fear that it would be engendered in children because they could identify with that, I think is probably why it was there.
So Tolkien defunded the police when it came to. Sorry.
Oh, we're not supposed to get political. No, I'm joking. That was good one, Michael. Well,
sorry.
All right.
He removed the policemen due to their unsuitability to the Middle Earth.
That's right. Yes, they There were no policemen. They were, however, rangers. So maybe
Yeah,
that's
and they
even
were
better.
those were policemen of a type. Yeah,
Of a
so
type.
they're
Yeah, rangers.
an old
I would rather
type.
lone rangers. I would rather have a lone ranger than
There you
than
go.
a sheriff. All right. Well, that's going to do it for this week, guys. We will have a brief extended edition here, which you can get to by going to theonering.com/member. First month is free, $4 a month. You can get the extended edition. It's pretty awesome, if I do say so myself. We let our hair down a little bit and tell you about all the nitty-gritty details we forgot to mention in this.
Join us. Join us.
Or what?
Or you'll just keep being a freeloader.
Oh, freeloaders. Gotta love them.